On this episode of Death Row Stories.
All of a sudden I heard some gunshots. They shot the pizza man.
A Louisiana house party ends in murder.
Corey Williams confessed to being the shooter.
He was actively involved in this crime.
When a teenager goes on trial, an aggressive DA pursues the maximum punishment.
To get a jury to kill, you have to transform this child into a monster.
We were at our last straw.
But as evidence emerges, so does the truth.
I remember listening to these tapes completely shocked from what I was hearing.
It ain't gonna be no easy fight.
There's a body in the water.
He was butchered and murdered. Many people proclaim their innocence.
In this case, there are a number of things that stink.
This man is remorseless.
He needs to pay for it with his life.
The electric chair flashed in front of my eyes.
Get a conviction at all costs. Let the truth fall where it may.
On January 4th, 1998, pizza delivery man Jarvis Griffin dropped off an order at a house party in the Queensboro neighborhood of Shreveport, Louisiana.
The Queensboro area, it was pretty common that there was some sort of violent crime there. Gunshots, those types of things. The night the crime took place, there was some sort of a party. At some point, decided they wanted to order a pizza. When the pizza delivery person arrived, they decided they were going to rob him.
After handing off the pizza, Jarvis Griffin walked back to his car when he was suddenly attacked.
The bullet went through his lungs and clipped a major artery to his heart, and he died. Well, that's a first-degree murder.
When police got to the scene, they began questioning people who'd been at the house party.
What I need you to do is, in your own words, tell us exactly where you were just prior to all this happening.
It was some people that were hanging outside before anything had happened. And everybody was talking about the pizza man. It was he gonna take some of the price off because he was late. I was in the house when the pizza man arrived. All of a sudden I heard some gunshots. They shot the pizza man.
Among the partygoers, police also questioned two brothers, 20-year-old Nathan and 16-year-old Gabriel Logan. At the station, Nathan pointed to 16-year-old Corey Williams as the shooter.
The story is that Corey is outside, and Gabriel gives Corey a gun. The driver was shot, and Corey ran home. Gabriel moved the driver out of the way, grabbed about $30 and some pizza.
Under questioning, Corey said that Gabriel had shot the driver. But after several hours in custody, Corey's story changed.
Okay, Corey, what I need you to do is tell me what happened.
We seen a Pizza Hut, man. And then he said, man, let's get him. Then I walked up to the car, and then I started shooting. And then when I started shooting, he ran over there and got the money again.
After Corey Williams confessed, Nathan Logan was released. Gabriel Logan was ultimately charged with second-degree murder. Corey would face the death penalty. Corey's trial began on October 26, 2000. He was represented by attorney Stephen Glassell.
He was 16 at the time. There's evidence to point that maybe he wasn't the trigger man. Maybe it was Gabriel Logan or one of the other witnesses that was not prosecuted by the state. What I do know is that Corey Williams confessed to being the shooter.
Despite Corey being only 16 years old at the time of the crime, legendary Assistant DA Hugo Holland charged him as an adult.
Hugo Holland is an extremely experienced prosecutor. They decided that Corey was guilty of this and should get the death penalty. Hugo really went after him big time.
The state built its case around an eyewitness who'd been outside the party that night, Chris Moore. Moore testified that as delivery man Jarvis Griffin backed his car out of the driveway, Corey Williams approached and began firing. As Griffin lay dying, Gabriel Logan robbed him. Defense attorney Stephen Glassell argued that outside of Chris Moore's testimony and Corey's confession, nothing linked his client to the crime.
There was blood found on Gabriel Logan's shirt. There was testimony that he reached over the pizza driver and got the money bag. The gun was recovered near the Logan residence. And Nathan Logan, his fingerprints were found on the magazine in the gun. We argued that the older kids were pointing the finger at Corey because he was the young kid, and they could deflect blame on themselves by pointing to somebody else.
It took the jury just 1 hour to render their verdict. Corey Williams was guilty of first-degree murder.
With the first-degree murder, the jury made the decision on life or death. I didn't think Corey would get the death penalty.
But on October 28, 2000, the jury handed down a death sentence. Corey Williams would become the youngest inmate to enter death row at Louisiana's Angola Prison.
I was real small. When I put my head at the head of the bed, half of my feet wouldn't even make it to the center of the mattress. On death row, they don't allow you to be in cells with other prisoners, and you be on lockdown 23 hours in one. I felt like, I wasn't gonna never see my mom, them outside of Angola no more.
Corey grew up the oldest of 4 children in a family struggling with poverty in Shreveport.
Shreveport is actually a pretty big place. There's a lot of poverty. People think that the urban areas of Los Angeles, California are the real jungles of the world. When you look at the real statistics, the murder rate is always higher in Louisiana in places like this.
As an indigent defendant, Corey turned to the Capital Appeals Project to fight his case. Ben Cohen became his attorney.
I got involved in Corey's case in December of 2000. I go up to death row to meet him and expect this sort of fierce, angry person that Holland had described. And he's this child that looks up at you and smiles and wants you to smile back. When Corey was 2, he lived in a house that had 14 people in it. There were roaches and feces and the falling down house next door where the paint chips leak lead into the soil that Corey's playing in. And so Corey's lead levels were horrific.
When I was a little kid, I almost died. I had 2 times the legal amount. to kill a full-grown adult.
Lead prevents your brain from growing and developing, especially for young children. And Corey's lead levels likely caused his intellectual disability. Corey had a 68 IQ. That disability causes him to trust people when he shouldn't. It causes him to be naive. People will tell him things, and he will believe them.
As he investigated why Corey would confess to a crime he didn't commit, Ben learned that police had questioned Corey for 6 hours before he finally admitted to the murder.
People with intellectual disability are more likely to falsely confess or be coerced into giving statements that aren't true. The police talked to him throughout the night. He's not eating, he's not drinking. And this is what the police officers do, is they say, we know you've done this. It's that pressure that at some point causes him to say, yes, I did it, now can I go home?
I told him, I didn't do nothing. I don't know what he talking about. I was sleepy, I was disoriented. I really didn't understand what was going on.
What kind of gun is it?
I don't know what kind it is.
What color was it?
Huh?
What color was it?
Black.
Was that same gun you saw a while ago? It was? Your fingerprints on that gun?
Who?
Are your fingerprints on that gun?
And no matter what I said, it wasn't enough. And, eventually I was like, man, whatever, I'm gonna just do whatever it takes just to, go home and lay down. At least I thought I was gonna go home and lay down.
I ain't got to answer no more questions. Come on, I'm tired. I'm ready to go home and lay down.
I don't have any more questions.
We contested the confession in a pretrial motion to suppress. The district court judge denied the motion. It's extremely hard to win one because you have a law enforcement officer up there and judges generally believe their testimony.
Corey's case had unfolded against a national backdrop of harsh law and order policies.
In the 90s, the crack epidemic had gotten to a point where it was a part of American fabric. Violence and violent crime in inner cities was something that was just completely out of control. People were labeled as predators or super predators.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Blacks must understand and acknowledge the roots of white fear in America. There is a legitimate fear of the violence that is too prevalent in our urban areas. Violence for those white people too often has a black face.
Riding a wave of public anxiety over rising violence, President Clinton signed a new crime bill into law in 1994.
It was the beginning of a real lockdown of America. He came into office, there were like 800,000 people locked up. By the time he left office, there were 2 million people locked up.
In Shreveport, Louisiana's tough-on-crime approach was led by prosecutor Hugo Holland.
I would consider District Attorney Hugo Holland as probably one of the most ferocious legal predators that they have in the state of Louisiana. He had a big portrait on the entrance of the District Attorney's office of one of the architects of the Ku Klux Klan. Caddo Parish, per capita, sent more people to death row than any county in the United States of America.
Shreveport was the Confederacy's last stand. It was a part of the country that Reconstruction never touched. And there has been this sordid violence towards people of color, African Americans, for over 100 years. And so this was where Corey was raised.
At Corey's trial, the prosecution repeatedly referred to Corey as a predator. His defense attorney, Stephen Glassell, never objected.
That term, predator, is dehumanizing and inflammatory and prejudicial. I don't know why I didn't object. I would not consider Corey to be a predator. He was kind of just an immature guy that was a follower and was a tag along.
To get a jury of 12 unanimous people to kill, you have to transform this child into a monster. Race, unquestionably, plays this deep, inextricable role in the way that Corey was treated.
As he worked to save Corey's life, appeals attorney Ben Cohen faced a difficult choice about strategy.
Do you focus on the fact that this is a potentially innocent person convicted in, circumstances where you should get a new trial? Or do you focus on the fact that he is a 16-year-old with intellectual disability and should be exempt from punishment? It doesn't matter if you're innocent, if you're dead.
Ben's path forward would become clear in 2002, when the U.S. Supreme Court decided a landmark case, Atkins versus Virginia.
By a 6-3 margin, the Supreme Court has ruled that executing the mentally retarded now violates the Constitution's Eighth Amendment ban against cruel and unusual punishment, because, wrote Justice John Paul Stevens, of their disabilities in areas of reasoning, judgment, and control of their impulses.
We file supplemental briefs talking about how Corey is a person with intellectual disability.
In October 2003, the Louisiana courts considered Corey's disability and ultimately agreed to change his sentence to life without parole. But moving off death row brought new challenges. Corey would now be among Angola's notorious general population and without the services of his attorney, Ben Cohen. Although Ben Cohen was no longer his attorney, he continued to follow Corey's case.
It was really hard. Corey would call our office, and there would be times when he would be screaming on the phone because he was so scared or because something had gone wrong. When you're in prison, there's times when you get taken advantage of. There's times when it's not safe. And Corey was vulnerable.
On death row, everybody up there got the same thing in common. Everybody facing lethal injection. Whereas in population, you got thousands of personalities to deal with. You got more freedom, but it come at a high risk.
Angola is the last penal colony in the United States of America. It's 18,000 acres, a little larger than the island of Manhattan. It was previously a slave breeding plantation. They needed a way to keep Negroes not just in their place, but in these fields that they were working. It was known in the 1970s and 80s as the bloodiest prison in America because of the stabbings, because of the rapes, because of the constant violence. And I used to think, man, this is sick. Is this really in the United States of America?
Curtis Davis spent nearly 25 years in Angola for murder before his wrongful conviction was overturned.
When I first came to Angola, it was 1992. In prison, I became a tutor, and I dedicated myself to trying to teach men to read and write.
I met Curtis Davis, a law librarian, and seeing those guys in there fighting for their freedom. If they was willing to sacrifice their time, I signed up.
He just came in with this big old smile. He's like, I've been accused of a crime that I didn't commit, and I want to go home. I know you can help me. I told him that he could come to class. He was there every day because he felt like he had been wronged, and it was that thing that was driving him. He would say, but this is the United States. If you are an innocent person, the truth's supposed to win out. He made me start believing it again, because he believed so much.
9 years after Corey was moved off death row, Capitol Appeals Project Attorney Blythe Taplin took over his case. Blythe turned her attention to eyewitness statements that police recorded the night Jarvis Griffin was murdered.
There was a line, I believe, in a pretrial hearing where defense counsel had said, I believe that there are audio recordings of these witness statements. I'm entitled to them. And the DA at the time said, I've reviewed them, and there's nothing on there that's different than the police reports. And so defense counsel never got access to them at the time of trial. So someone sent a follow-up request saying, we're looking for tapes. And we received responses saying that they couldn't locate the file. They said, it likely was destroyed a long time ago. During the course of all of this, members of Corey's team were getting this overwhelming response from the community that everyone knew what had happened to Corey and everyone knew he didn't commit this crime.
Blythe began searching for witnesses, specifically a man named Patrick Anthony.
Patrick Anthony was not from Shreveport, was just visiting. He was living in Texas at the time, so not many people knew him very well. He was there that night on the scene, clearly had relevant things to say, and he had never been interviewed by defense counsel ever. The district attorney had said that they couldn't locate him. So we set about trying to find him.
Well, I didn't find out about Corey's sentence until, I say probably around 2015. I got a call from Blythe trying to find out exactly what happened. The lawyer was just very persistent.
Had to explain, I represent Corey Williams, and I know it's been, 15 years, but I need to talk to you about that night.
That night, me and Nathan Logan was watching movies, and we decided to order a pizza. Pizza man, and he says, man, well, I'm sorry, and I ended up getting lost, so that's why I was ended up late. Nathan's brother, Gabriel, said, I ought to jack you for being late. Before we can even sit down and eat the pizza good, I heard gunshots. We walk outside, Gabriel hands Nathan the pistol. Nathan said, I need you to hide this gun for me. And so that's when I actually took the gun, and I ended up wiping off the fingerprints and put it in a chip bag, and then I threw it back on the side of the road. The police said I could be held accountable for this murder. I let them know exactly what happened, where I hid the pistol, and when they let me go, that was the last that I heard anything about the case.
The police told Patrick he would have to return to Louisiana to testify. But after Corey confessed, the request was dropped. The defense never got the chance to question him.
Patrick told his story and was very clear from what he witnessed, what he saw. Corey could not have committed this crime.
Maybe if I was able to let the jury hear my side, the outcome wouldn't have been the same. Because I probably would have been able to say, I seen Gabriel give Nathan the gun. Maybe the prosecution didn't want me to tell that story.
We took a statement from Patrick, and we're going to proceed with that as our biggest sort of piece of evidence to bring to the court to try to get them to reverse Corey's conviction. And then I think it was just a couple days later, the district attorney called and said, you're not going to believe it, but turns out we do have this box of these witness tapes, and you can come up and review it.
prosecutors claimed the tapes matched written summaries given to the defense. But Corey's team learned otherwise.
Nathan Logan told officers on the night of the crime that he had witnessed the events immediately following the shooting of Jarvis Griffin. He indicated that it was his brother.
So who do you think did it? To me, Gabriel, he had to do it.
But when Gabriel showed up, and y'all met up for the first time after the shooting happened, he had the gun with him.
He had that gun.
Did he have the money bags?
Yes, sir. He had the money bags. Do you think Gabriel shot him? Yes, sir.
Comparing that to the summary that the prosecution turned over to the defense at trial is shocking. The summary says that Nathan Logan thought Corey Williams committed the crime. One of the other shocking discrepancies between the summaries and the actual recordings is that the police officers themselves repeatedly suggest that it is these older men who are getting together and framing Corey for this crime.
What I heard was that when they was talking, they said that Corey shot the man.
Sound like to me, y'all all decided y'all gonna blame it on Corey.
None of the police officers' suspicion that Corey is actually innocent and being framed is mentioned in any of the summaries that are turned over to the defense. And you had years and years of concealing the fact that these tapes existed. And that was done by prosecutors who dug their heels in for years.
I remember having just this sadness come over me that what Corey had been saying since he was 16 years old and what his lawyers had been saying for 15 years. There's the detective on the case saying the same thing on the night of the crime, and no one turned that over. And it just, it was infuriating and heartbreaking, and at the same time, you have that moment of like, we've got it. Okay, this is the moment.
In a June 2015 hearing, Blythe argued that this new evidence cast doubt on Corey's confession, and in turn, demanded a retrial.
We thought, we're going to be able to walk Corey out of prison, and we're going to just show this to the DA. There's going to be no question that Corey should go home.
James Stewart was elected Cato Parish District Attorney in 2015 and inherited the case.
The state's perspective was, we have a confession and we have evidence that substantiates that confession. The only ruling you have in this case terms his mental retardation is a ruling that said, for purposes of the death penalty, he was mentally retarded. That's not a ruling on his competence to give a free and voluntary statement.
In October 2015, the appeals court concluded that the recorded eyewitness statements were speculative and therefore inadmissible. Corey's confession was also allowed to stand.
That high from thinking, look at these tapes, they show that Corey's innocent, like nobody else cared. We appeal in 2016. We continue to appeal, and Corey's in prison all of this time. And we keep losing.
By 2018, Corey's state appeals were exhausted. His last chance rested with the highest court in the land and attorney Amir Ali.
On average, 1% of petitions are even reviewed by the Supreme Court. So those were Corey's odds at this time. We're talking about 1 in 100 to even get the Supreme Court's attention. We tell the Supreme Court the Louisiana court's failure to take into account the fact that Corey was intellectually disabled when evaluating the significance of his confession. And the second error is the Louisiana court's conclusion that it did not violate the law to withhold these recordings.
Corey's petition got the attention of 44 former justice officials who wrote to the Supreme Court on his behalf.
When I heard my case going to the Supreme Court, I was very nervous and happy. Man, this is the highest court in land. But I was nervous because it's hard to get your case heard up there. And if I get shot down up there, what else happened?
My first question is, okay, are we right? You have to look to see if there's a significant issue, constitutional issue that you might want to address. And I think that's what happened in Corey Williams. Maybe there was something we needed to look at.
While the Supreme Court considered whether to take Corey's case, District Attorney James Stewart hired former homicide detective Rod Demery to reinvestigate his case.
I think the responsibility is on law enforcement. But I wanted to talk to the investigator who investigated the case. He said, well, he confessed. It's difficult enough to take a confession from someone without any corroborating evidence. It's even more difficult to take a confession from someone who doesn't have a complete understanding of a lot of things. After my interview with Corey, we went back to the DA's office and the DA asked me my opinion. He said, well, we got to figure out what we need to do to make it right.
I met with Corey's defense attorneys several times, and I hate to use this word, but they bugged me to death. I mean, they were sending messages, and they were very passionate. Finally, I was able to look at the case the way I needed to. Although I would agree that he had some level of lesser understanding, he was actively involved in some way in this crime. And he didn't have to be the shooter, but I thought he had some criminal culpability to the point that I would not say he was absolutely innocent.
During these negotiations, we refused to get our hopes up, and it was, Ben, Blythe, and I, in consultation with Corey, cautiously optimistic. The key part of that agreement for our purposes was that Corey would be immediately released from confinement.
I didn't want to retry the case. I took into consideration that he had served enough time to satisfy justice. I wasn't sure that they could win their arguments in front of the Supreme Court. I thought there was enough chance that I was willing to take the plea.
In the spring of 2018, James Stewart offered Corey a choice: plead guilty to manslaughter and leave prison with time served, but give up any right to sue for wrongful conviction.
People didn't wake up with a conscience and decide, what, we're going to try to right this wrong. People woke up with an urgency of self-preservation. It should take a whole lot less than the Supreme Court to motivate someone to find out why this 16-year-old kid with an IQ as low as Corey's is actually in prison.
I was undecided initially about the term of the deal due to the fact that I was innocent, but it was an ending, a nightmare that had been going on, the last 20 years. The night before, I couldn't even sleep. All I was saying was, man, I'm finna be home. I was just thinking in my mind all the stuff, that I'm gonna eat, the stuff that I'm gonna do, stuff that I haven't done. When I was walking out of Angola, I couldn't walk fast enough. I remember the man saying, Corey, slow down, you gotta sign the book. Even when you leave Angola, you gotta sign a logbook validating you leaving.
Corey just had the biggest smile on his face, and he was extraordinary. The first thing he did was just thank everyone for working so hard for him.
The day I got out, I remember a warm reception. It was perfect.
I tell him this all the time, but he is the one that gave us the strength. He is the one who pushed people to keep going. Just watching him and watching everything he went through and how he handled it. Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Now that I'm out, I'm having dreams about being on death row. I'm having dreams about all the years I was in Angola. What I went through in prison still affecting me mentally. You know, I wake up at night, cold sweats. I was in prison 20 years and 4 months altogether.
The average person that's convicted of a felony is not going to be able to work a certain job. Until recently, you weren't allowed to vote. Anywhere worth living is not going to allow a felon to live there.
I'm currently living with my mom. I'm just, starting to put my life together.
What I would want from our police, from our DAs, from our justice system is that it protects the weakest amongst us. And that what they did to Corey was they just picked on the weakest. That's what Hugo Holland did.
In 2012, Hugo Holland was forced to resign after he was caught falsifying federal documents in order to procure a cache of assault rifles. Today, Holland tries cases as a freelancer and remains one of the highest paid prosecutors in Louisiana.
He made about $200,000 last year. He made more than the governor of Louisiana, just prosecuting cases.
As of May 2019, fully half of Holland's death penalty convictions have been overturned. He has never been disciplined for prosecutorial misconduct.
Hugo is an interesting person. That's about all I want to say about him. But he won't be prosecuting any cases in Caddo Parish while I'm DA.
When I first got out of Angola, Blythe took me to the bank and she opened up an account for me. It changed your mindset when you got a bank account. When I got my first check, it made me feel like I'm part of the corporate world. I like to start a small lawn company. I can cut grass real good. Before the summer kick off, I'm gonna be full swing.